Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to late 15th century Germany, an era of bustling markets, bad hygiene, and some very, very unlucky careers. You're not a knight or a merchant or even a jester. No, tonight you're a rat catcher. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. Picture this. The year is 1491. You trudge into the walled town of Nördlingen, your boots already soaked with slush, mud, and possibly something more sinister. The cobbled streets are slick with waste, both human and animal, and the air is a ripe cocktail of cabbage stew, horse sweat, and moldy straw. Somewhere, a baby's crying. Somewhere else, a pig is screaming, and you're just trying not to gag. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've arrived here because you heard the town needed a rat catcher. It's not glamorous, it's not respected, but it's work. And considering your options were either starving in a roadside ditch or getting beaten for stealing eggs, this seemed downright aspirational. No one greets you at the gate. That's normal. The gatekeeper just squints, scratches himself in a place best left unmentioned, and waves you through without lifting the bar fully. You duck under it, your pack thumping against your shoulder. Inside, the town is both alive and crumbling. Half-timbered houses lean over muddy lanes, chickens strut like they own the place, and every third person is coughing with medieval intensity. You pass a woman haggling with a fishmonger over what might be a slightly less dead fish. The fishmonger is using a scale made of wood and blind optimism. Nearby, a preacher is shouting something about sin and sausages. Typical Thursday. You're wearing the same clothes you've worn for the last 3 weeks. Woolen tunic, stiff leather boots, and a cloak that has definitely been chewed on. By rats or time, you're not sure. Your hat is floppy in a way that might be stylish, or might just be moldy. Honestly, it's hard to tell anymore. You keep walking. The smell doesn't get better. That's the first sign you're in the right part of town. Rat catcher territory is always where things are. Fermenting. A boy throws a rock at you and misses, barely. His mother yells at you for walking too close to her front step. Scare off the blessings, she mutters, clutching her apron as if it can defend her from your aura of doomed employment. Historians still argue whether rat catchers were truly feared, pitied, or simply ignored. But in this moment, you feel like all three. A walking contradiction in a smelly hat. You've heard whispers of the last rat catcher in this town. Apparently, he got bit on the job and died 2 days later, shaking and babbling about furred demons. They buried him in a shallow grave behind the tanner's yard. No one cried, but the rats came back anyway. Eventually, you find the town's main square. There's a cracked fountain in the middle with what may have once been an angel, now with one wing missing and its face scrubbed off by time. A crude posting board leans at a questionable angle, jammed between the stalks and a sign warning about pickpockets. On a sheet of parchment, barely clinging to a rusty nail, you spot your job listing, Seeking Rat Man. Good conduct, fair coin. Fair is doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. You ask around and get directed to the burgermeister's assistant, a man who smells like celery and looks like he hasn't laughed since the last century. He doesn't bother standing up as he sizes you up. Can you kill rats? You nod. With what? You hesitate. Then you hold up your sack and your homemade club, technically a chair leg. He sighs. Fine. You'll be paid per tail. Bring proof. Try not to cause more problems than you solve. It's the closest thing to a contract you're going to get. There's no official housing, of course. You're directed toward an abandoned goat shed behind the cooper's shop. The floor is straw. The walls are half wood, half wishful thinking. A small hole in the back lets out smoke from your fire, when you can find firewood. The previous occupant seems to have been a chicken, or perhaps something worse. There's a feather stuck to the wall with dried blood. You ignore it. That night, you lie awake listening to the town breathe. It wheezes. There's the constant murmur of conversation, the occasional clang of a drunk against a shutter, and rats. Always rats. You hear them under the floorboards, sometimes bold enough to climb over your legs. You flick one away with your foot and mutter a prayer to whichever saint is currently accepting minor emergencies. In the morning, you wake up with straw in your mouth and a stiffness in your back that makes you question all your life choices. Your first task is figuring out where to start. You follow the smell and the screaming. A butcher swears he saw a rat the size of a dachshund eating his salt pork. An innkeeper claims her ale is cursed because a rat drowned in the barrel. A baker's wife refuses to enter her pantry unless someone sings hymns first. You get to work with your stick, your sack, and a scowl that says you've seen too much and slept too little. Rats are clever. They vanish just before you strike. They pop out of holes you didn't notice. You sweat through your tunic as you chase one through a bakery, knocking over flour sacks and getting bitten on the ankle. You catch it in the sack, slam it against the ground, and tie the sack closed. One tail. You hold it up like a trophy. It's still twitching. The butcher gives you a slice of gray sausage and a mug of beer instead of coin. You pretend not to care. The beer is warm and the sausage is chewy. As you walk the street, you pass a group of boys kicking a ball of rags. One stops to ask, "Are you the rat man now?" When you nod, they scatter like you've said you're made of snakes. Further down, the town physician stares at you as though you've just sneezed on his soul. He's carrying a leather satchel full of leeches and attitude. You wonder briefly if he charges the rats. By mid-afternoon, you've collected 7 tails, a splinter in your palm, and 2 new blisters. The townsfolk give you slightly more nods than they did before. Not enough to imply respect, just enough to say, "Thanks for taking the gross job." You stop by a tavern to ask about lodging. The barkeep laughs until he sees you're serious, then directs you to the stool in the far corner near the chamber pot. You drink a second mug of warm beer and try to convince yourself it's hydrating. Back in your shed, the sun starts to set in streaks of amber and gray. You sit on your bundle of rags and examine the day's catch. A few mangled tails, some scratches on your wrist, and the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly the same. You try to light a small fire, but the wood is damp and your flint is chipped. You eat a chunk of sausage, now slightly less edible than earlier, and chew slowly. A rat watches you from the edge of the wall, perfectly still. You stare back. Neither of you blinks. Tomorrow you'll start earlier. Maybe set a trap. Maybe talk to that old man near the weaver's shop. He claims he once made rats dance for bacon. You're skeptical but desperate. You wrap your cloak around yourself and lie back on the straw. A drop of something, maybe rain, maybe roof rot, lands on your forehead. You sigh. Congratulations. You're now a rat catcher. The next morning starts with a shriek. not yours, thankfully. It's the high-pitched wail of a baker's apprentice, followed by the unmistakable crash of pottery and a string of words that would have gotten him flogged in front of the church steps, if he wasn't currently hopping around with a rat clinging to his sleeve like it paid rent. You're already up, gnawing on yesterday's bread, which has now gone from crusty to fossilized. You chew like a medieval cow, grimly and without much joy. You stuff the rest into your bag, sling your sack over your shoulder, and head into town. This is your routine now. By the third day, your presence draws fewer stares. Not because people like you, but because they're used to you. The market women stop whispering and start yelling near you again. The apothecary stops crossing himself when you walk past, and the town priest only flinches slightly when you duck into the church for a bit of warmth. That's progress. But let's not romanticize it. Being a rat catcher is not some noble calling. It's more like being a walking apology for civilization. You are the consequence of open sewers, rotting grain stores, and centuries of people tossing fish guts into alleys like that's someone else's problem. Today, your beat is the grain warehouse near the edge of town. It's an old wooden barn held together by sheer defiance and bird poop. The owner, a balding man named Jurgen who smells strongly of garlic and regret, waves you in with a broom. "They're in the rafters," he says, then retreats to the safety of his dog, who is both blind and afraid of shadows. You step inside. The smell hits you first: mildew, dust, and the sour note of old barley. And something else, something alive. You crouch, listening. Soft scratches, the faint rustle of movement, and then a thud above you. You look up just in time to catch a glimpse of beady eyes and flicking tails vanishing behind a crossbeam. You climb a ladder that probably hasn't been trusted since the Hussite Wars. At the top, you crouch in the rafters with your stick in hand, praying it doesn't snap while you swing. The rats are bold, fat, too well fed. You spot one nibbling on a kernel, completely unbothered by your presence. It looks you dead in the eye before waddling into a hole in the timber. You set your first trap. It's crude. A chunk of meat tied to a looped string, rigged to a bent nail and a piece of slate. Not exactly Da Vinci's design, but you make do. Historians still argue whether medieval traps were more sophisticated than we give them credit for, or just wishful thinking propped up with string and panic. But one thing's clear: rat catching was more art than science, and you, sadly, are not an artist yet. You wait. You get one, then two. You're up to 5 before your fingers start to go numb from the cold, and the dust makes your nose itch like a peasant curse. You sneeze and slip, managing to dangle one leg off the beam before you scramble back to safety. You laugh, half out of relief, half out of the creeping realization that you are very much alone up here. Back on solid ground, Jurgen gives you half a loaf and a pat on the shoulder that's almost friendly. "Good rat man," he says. You resist the urge to bow, or cry. Later, you walk through the street, your sack slightly heavier. A child points at you and whispers something to his friend. They giggle. You give them a wink. They scream and run. Classic. At the town square, you see a posting being nailed to the board. St. Erasmus Festival, 2 weeks away. You've never been to a festival as anything but background noise. Too poor for the good food, too smelly for the dancing. But maybe this year, things will be different. Maybe. You turn into an alley behind the tanner's yard. That's when you meet her. She's kneeling by a wooden bucket, trying to scoop water from a puddle with a cracked ladle. Her clothes are patched in the same 3 places as yours, and her hair is tucked into a scarf that's doing its best. She looks up. You the new rat man? You nod. She squints. You're braver than the last one. He cried. Loudly. Wasn't my first plan, you admit. She smirks. You want better traps? Talk to the glassblower's apprentice. He makes them from broken flasks. Smells like vinegar, but clever hands. You thank her. She nods. Doesn't introduce herself. Just goes back to the puddle like that conversation never happened. But you make a mental note. Helpful strangers are rare. Helpful strangers who don't immediately mock your profession are rarer still. You find the apprentice a few hours later. He's young, twitchy, and suspicious of your coat. You smell like fungus, he says by way of greeting. You make traps? Do you have coin? You dig in your bag. 3 copper pfennigs, a chicken feather, and a pebble shaped like a potato. He takes the coins and throws in a vinegar flask that looks vaguely like a fish with teeth. You have no idea how it works, but you thank him. By evening, you've installed your new trap near the cheesemonger's back room. The rats there have grown bold, nibbling holes straight through the walls. The cheesemonger offered you a heel of hard cheese if you get results. You consider it fair pay, until you taste the cheese later and wonder if it's just compressed chalk. You stop at the tavern again. This time, the barkeep offers you stew. It contains at least 2 vegetables and possibly 0 rats. You call that a victory. A few more tails go into the sack. You're up to 12 for the day, enough to get you a full ration of bread tomorrow. You return to your shed, fingers sore, knees aching, but slightly warmer than before. The fire crackles, a generous term for the sad bundle of twigs barely glowing in the corner. But it's something. As you settle into your straw bed, you think about that girl at the puddle, about the apprentice, about how your world, while still disgusting and damp, is starting to shift just a little. And that's when you hear it. Not a rat, not a mouse, but a voice. Low. Chanting. In the alley behind your shed. You freeze. You inch toward the back slat, pulling aside a crack in the wood. 3 figures. Hooded. One holding a candle stub, the others swaying gently. You hear the words cleansing and infestation and something about blood of Saint Gerhard. You don't breathe. Eventually, they leave. Just vanish into the dark. You exhale. Welcome to Germany in the 1490s. Not only do you have to fight rats, you might also have to dodge amateur exorcists with poor lighting choices. And still, somehow, you fall asleep. The next day, your eyes snap open before dawn. Not because you're particularly disciplined, but because the rats have figured out how to get into your grain sack again. You bolt upright, swinging your arm wildly in the half-dark, knocking over a cup of water that immediately soaks into the straw floor. The rat, entirely unbothered, hops down with a squeak that sounds almost smug. You sigh and mutter something vaguely threatening about turning it into a hat. There's no time for vengeance, though. Today you've been summoned. Not by Jurgen the Garlic King or the Cheesemonger, but by the City Council. That sounds more official than it is. The council is really 3 men who sit at a long table and occasionally wag fingers at people for walking too loudly or sneezing during sermons. They're powerful in the same way a particularly well-fed goose is dangerous. Mostly bluster, occasionally terrifying. You're not entirely sure why they want you, but you don't have much choice. The note was delivered by a boy who didn't even wait for your reply. It simply read, Council. Morning bell. Do not be late. In the 1490s, Germany, that's basically a love letter and a threat rolled into one. So you arrive early. The meeting hall smells like smoke, wet wool, and the sort of expensive candles you'll never be allowed to touch. The counselors sit behind their wooden table, expressions carved from stone, or possibly leftover cheese. One of them, the oldest, leans forward with a creak that sounds like a haunted door hinge. "We've had complaints," he begins, tapping a scroll like it personally offended him. You nod, trying to look both competent and vaguely penitent. It's a delicate dance. Rats in the granary, rats in the bakery, rats in the convent garden. Sister Agnes reports they've eaten every carrot and at least one rosary. You consider apologizing, but the second counselor speaks up. "We know it's not your fault. The last 2 rat catchers gave up, or died. It's hard to say." Comforting. The third counselor, a heavy-set man with a voice like gravel and butter, adds, "We've allocated funds for 5 more traps, and if you clean out the convent garden by St. Erasmus Day, we'll give you a winter cloak. Wool, mostly. No fleas." You blink. That's a big deal. A cloak. Something between a reward and an official recognition of existence. You agree immediately. The meeting ends with a grunt and a nod, which is bureaucratic for, "You may leave now before we remember something else." You head straight to the convent garden. It's quiet here, eerily so. Snow still clings to the edges of the hedges, and the little stone bench near the fig tree is iced over. The garden used to be a place of calm reflection, but now it's a battlefield. You see droppings, gnawed roots, and the skeletal remains of a once glorious cabbage. Sister Agnes appears from behind a frost-covered trellis. She's in her 60s, fierce-eyed, and holding a rake like she knows how to use it. "You the new one?" she asks. You nod. "Don't mess this up. I'm tired of praying over rat corpses." She storms off in a cloud of brisk disapproval. You like her. You start by setting a few of the glassblower's traps. Then you crouch in the snow and trace the rat trails. Tiny, muddy prints leading under the hedge and toward the root cellar. You pry the door open and descend the steps. It smells like secrets and pickled beets. You light a stub of candle and peer around. Pickling jars line the walls, and something rustles behind a barrel. You inch forward, hand on your stick, and then you see it. Not one rat, not 5, but dozens. They're nesting in the cellar's corner, huddled together for warmth like some squirming, furry cult. One of them, a brute the size of a dinner roll, glares at you. You glare back. This is a showdown. You toss one of your last scraps of sausage as bait and wait. It works. Kind of. The rats surge forward, fighting over the meat. You drop the crate. The trap slams shut with a thud. You catch 6. The rest scatter like hairy lightning bolts. You spend the next hour flushing out the stragglers with a stick, some prayer, and a deep primal scream when one crawls up your leg. You emerge from the cellar victorious but bleeding slightly. Sister Agnes is waiting. She nods approvingly and hands you a muffin. Apple. No rats, I think. You devour it. Even questionable muffins taste like glory after a win like this. On your way back through town, a few people actually wave at you. The blacksmith grunts. The baker gives you a roll that only cracks one tooth. You're becoming a fixture. That evening, you sit in your shed, patching a hole in your sleeve and humming an old tune your grandmother used to sing about mice stealing socks. You're about halfway through when someone knocks at the door. You freeze. Nobody knocks on the rat catcher's door. You open it cautiously. It's her again. The puddle girl. "I figured you might be hungry," she says, holding out a bowl of something steaming. "Stew. Mostly lentils. no meat, unless lentils had legs. You blink. I didn't poison it, she adds. I wouldn't waste good lentils. You take it. Warm, spicy, almost civilized. Thanks. She shrugs and leans against the doorframe. You're doing better than the last guy. He tried to train a ferret. It turned on him. You snort. Sounds about right. You need gloves. Winter's only just started. I'll put it on the list, after socks. She smirks and walks off. See you around, rat man. The stew is better than it has any right to be. You savor every spoonful like it's a banquet. That night, you don't just fall asleep. You drift off, tucked under your moth-eaten blanket, belly full, heart slightly less cold. But the peace doesn't last. Just before sunrise, the banging starts. 3 hard knocks at your door, then shouting. Town watch. Open. You scramble out of bed, nearly tripping on your own boots. You fling open the door. It's 2 guards and a very nervous-looking merchant. This man, the merchant begins, let rats into my warehouse. On purpose. I saw him. He was feeding them. You blink. What? The guards look at you. One raises an eyebrow. Is this true? You try to speak, but words tumble out like soup. No, I mean, he hired me last week to remove rats. The merchant huffs. Lies. I caught him outside my door with a sack of rats. He's breeding them, I tell you, making his own business. This is a serious accusation. In the 1490s, Germany causing a rat infestation isn't just annoying, it's criminal. Towns have burned people for less. The guards step forward. You hold up your hands. Wait. Look in the sack. One guard pokes it open with the tip of his sword. Inside, tails. Dozens of them. No live rats. He exhales. They're dead. Of course they're dead, you say. That's my job. The merchant sputters. The second guard eyes him. You been drinking? Just a small mug of brandy, he mumbles. The guards nod. Apologies, Ratman. They walk off, dragging the merchant along. You sit down heavily, heart pounding. That was close. Too close. Welcome to your new life. Part exterminator, part scapegoat. You go back inside, sit, breathe, then you see it. A rat. On your bed. Staring. You stare back. It blinks slowly. You sigh. Not tonight. It skitters away. You wake up to the unmistakable scent of mildew, smoke, and a faint, suspicious whiff of something that might be either rat droppings or last week's stew. You're not sure which would be worse. Morning in your shed is never glamorous, but today it's colder than usual. Frost has crept up the inside of your one window pane, and your breath is visible in the air. You pull your threadbare blanket tighter, knowing you can't stay curled up much longer. The convent garden might be handled for now, but the town isn't short on infestations. In fact, business is, if you can call it that, booming. You're scheduled to make rounds today. 2 homes in the lower district, 1 merchant's storehouse, and the infamous old windmill at the edge of town, which someone apparently thought would make a great bakery until the rats moved in and declared it sovereign territory. You scarf down a breakfast of dry rye crusts and half an apple that may or may not have been partially chewed by a mouse. One benefit of your job: you're rarely squeamish anymore. If you were, you wouldn't last a week. Out in the cold, you wrap your cloak tight. The one the council gave you, it still smells faintly of turnips and wet goat, but it's woolen and it's warm. You remind yourself that in this line of work, that counts as luxury. You head to the first house, a small, timber-framed home just inside the southern gate. An old woman greets you, leaning heavily on her broom. She gives you a long, appraising look. You're not the one with the ferret, are you? Not any more, you answer truthfully. She nods, satisfied. Good. That one let rats into my oven. You spend an hour crawling under her floorboards, setting traps and poking at the walls with a stick. At one point, a rat runs up your arm, and you reflexively bash your shoulder into a beam, earning a bruised ego and a generous bump. Still, the traps are well placed, and you toss 2 live specimens into your sack. She gives you a crust of bread as payment. You pretend to be grateful. You're starting to suspect the town thinks you're part rat yourself, immune to shame, hunger, or human dignity. The merchant storehouse is worse. The smell hits you first. Mold, flour, and rat urine. The merchant, a wiry man with twitchy eyes and a nose like a pickled carrot, walks you around the damage. They're eating through everything. Sacks, crates, even the candle wax. Have you tried putting the food on shelves? You suggest gently. They climb, he hisses, eyes wide, like devils. Fair point. You get to work. Inside the storehouse, rats have set up a veritable rat utopia. Nests in grain bins, tunnels under the floor, and chew marks on practically every surface. One even runs past you with a lump of cheese nearly its own size, looking rather proud of itself. You deploy traps and scatter your secret weapon, powdered dried mint mixed with a bit of crushed garlic. Rats hate it. Humans hate it too, but only one of you pays your wages, sort of. After 2 hours and 1 minor ceiling collapse, you really didn't mean to step on that rafter. You've caught 6 rats and possibly disturbed the local rat monarchy. You're covered in dust, scratches, and the bitter knowledge that this is probably the high point of your week. You sit outside the storehouse afterward, catching your breath and examining a bite on your wrist that might fester. You're hoping it doesn't. Last winter, the guy before you lost 2 fingers to something toothy. You'd like to keep all 10, if possible. Then it's on to the windmill. This place is legend. Built in 1442, abandoned in 1478 after a flour explosion. Yes, that can happen. It was recently purchased by a baker with a vision. Unfortunately, the rats had visions too, mostly of free pastries. You approach with caution. The sails creak mournfully in the wind, and the upper windows gape like eye sockets. It's like something out of a bedtime horror tale, though in your case it's more like a Monday. Inside, the bakery setup is quaint. Flour sacks stacked high, a half-built oven, and the warm scent of dough mingling with, well, rat. A lot of rat. There's movement in the rafters. You look up and meet eyes with what might be the fattest rat you've ever seen. It stares down at you with the calm disdain of a medieval landlord. Great, you mutter. A chieftain. You start your sweep, careful to make noise so you don't surprise anything with teeth. This place is huge, and the rats know it better than you do. In one dark corner, you find a rat graveyard. Piles of bones, discarded peels, and one disturbingly chewed wooden spoon. You freeze when you hear a soft rustle behind you. Then another. They're circling. You grip your sack like a weapon and shout, "I will burn this place down." Not your wisest move. The rustling pauses, then stops. False alarm. It's just one rat getting caught in a flour bag. It bursts free and bolts, trailing a cloud of powder behind it like a ghost. You cough, laugh, and continue setting traps. You're finishing up when you hear a voice behind you. Looking for the queen? You spin around. It's her again. The girl. You're starting to think she's haunting you. "I'm everywhere," she says with a grin, as if reading your mind. "My aunt's the baker. She sent me to see if you're dead yet." Almost, you answer honestly. Do you know your attic is possessed? She nods. We call her Gretel. She's got one eye and a bad attitude. Lovely. You finish setting the last trap, this one baited with a sliver of smoked eel, and sit down beside the oven to rest. You want help? She asks. From you? She raises an eyebrow. I know rats. Grew up in a pub. We used to race them. Of course you did. But you nod, because at this point, you'll take whatever help you can get. You hand her a sack, and she gets to work without complaint. Together, you flush out 5 more rats, corner another behind the grain bins, and even catch sight of Gretel again, though she gives you the slip. Afterward, you sit in the doorway of the windmill, legs stretched out into the cold sun. You ever think about doing something else? You ask. She shrugs. What, like be a duchess? You snort. No, I mean anything but this. She's quiet for a moment. Sometimes, but I'm good at this. Besides, someone's got to do it. You look at her. You've never really had a partner in this job. It's not exactly a 2-person gig, but suddenly you wonder if it could be. Back in your shed that night, you count your haul. 15 rats, 3 traps lost to gnawing, 1 suspicious bite, and a conversation you can't quite get out of your head. As you drift off to sleep, the sound of tiny claws in the wall reminds you that there's always more work to be done. But maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to be all on you. The next morning, you wake to a sound so deeply irritating, it takes you a moment to place it. It's not rats. It's not distant church bells. It's tapping. Deliberate, rhythmic, and growing louder by the second. You pry open one eye to see the girl, your accidental assistant, peering through the tiny window of your shed. I brought breakfast, she announces, tapping again with a loaf of bread like it's a battering ram. Also, we're going to the tannery. You groan. Of course it's the tannery. You open the door, blinking into the morning light. She's already halfway through the bread. You're lucky, she says between bites. They've got a full-on rat uprising, and we get first crack. You're not sure if lucky is the right word. The tannery is widely known as the most revolting place in town. Even rats avoid it when they can. The stench alone is enough to peel paint from walls, or it would be, if walls here had paint. Still, a job's a job, and you've long since learned that rat catching isn't a career for the delicate or ambitious. You sling your sack over your shoulder, tuck a few extra traps into your belt, and follow her through the twisting alleys. As you walk, people stare. Not at her. She blends in effortlessly, hopping puddles and whistling a rude tune. No, they're staring at you. Word travels fast in towns like this, and apparently yesterday's windmill story is already making the rounds. You hear whispers. That's him, caught the windmill queen. And, did you hear he trained rats to fight each other? You do not correct them. Let them believe what they want. Your job has few perks. Local myth is one of them. The tannery squats like a moldy toad at the edge of town, tucked beside the river where all the runoff flows. You're hit by the smell before you even see the building. It's a pungent mix of urine, rotted hides, fermented bark, and, of course, rat. A tanner named Otto meets you at the door. He's huge, half-blind, and absolutely covered in scars and questionable stains. They chewed through the lime vats, he growls, nearly lost an apprentice. Did the apprentice survive, you ask? He shrugs. Mostly. Charming. Inside, the tannery is a horror show. Hides hang from hooks, barrels bubble with caustic chemicals, and rats scurry like shadows across the beams. Your boots squelch with every step. you think you might actually prefer being chewed on. You ever fall in one of these? You ask your companion. Once, she replies. Took 2 weeks to smell normal again. You both get to work. Unlike the windmill or the storehouse, the tannery presents unique rat-catching challenges. For one, it's loud. Apprentices hammering, shouting, stomping, and the rats have gotten bold. They know the patterns, the hiding spots. These aren't your average alleyway vermin. These are industrial rats, mean, organized, and probably unionized. You split up, working in separate wings of the building. You lay down poisoned bait in one corner, only to see it dragged away moments later. You chase a rat into a vat room and nearly lose your eyebrows to a chemical reaction. At one point, you swear a rat hisses something that sounds suspiciously like, "Come at me, scrub." You spend an hour setting traps in rafters, stacking buckets to reach the highest beams. You almost fall twice. Once, a rat jumps from a beam onto your back like it's reenacting a battlefield charge. You shriek, a perfectly dignified, masculine shriek, and throw it off. It lands in a puddle and sprints off, trailing foam. Meanwhile, the girl appears to be making friends. You catch her whistling softly, coaxing a particularly large rat out from under a hide stack with a bit of sausage. "This one's got a limp," she tells you, petting it gently. "Name's Klaus." "We're not keeping Klaus," you say. She shrugs, slipping him into a small cage. "We'll see." By midday, you've caught nearly 24 rats and flushed out triple that. The tannery feels marginally less alive. Otto grunts approval and tosses you a copper coin each, which feels both insulting and wildly generous by your usual standards. "You want lunch?" your companion asks as you trudge away. "Does it involve washing first?" She grins. "I'll take that as a yes." You head to her aunt's bakery, which, despite the rat troubles, still manages to smell heavenly. You sit behind the building, washing your hands in cold water from a cistern and munching on fresh bread and smoked herring. She talks about Klaus like he's an old friend, and you listen, strangely content. That's when she asks it. "So, why are you a rat catcher anyway?" You pause. You've been asked before, of course, usually by drunk people at the tavern or annoyed townsfolk. But no one's ever really wanted the answer. They assume you're desperate, stupid, or cursed. Sometimes you wonder if you are. "I didn't want to be a farmer," you finally say. "Too many rules, too many relatives." She laughs. "Rats don't argue." "Exactly." She leans back, looking at the sky. "I wanted to be a juggler." "Seriously? Why not?" "I've got good hands." You glance at the traps strapped to her belt. "I believe it." You sit in silence for a moment, both of you chewing. There's something unspoken in the air, something like camaraderie, but grubbier and slightly more feral. You're not sure what to call it. That evening, you head to the Northern District, where a man claims the rats are stealing his prayer scrolls. You don't quite believe him, but it's a paid job, and that's rare. As you step into his home, dark, quiet, lined with shelves, you see the shredded remains of parchment scattered across the floor. He's not lying. The rats really have been targeting scrolls. Historians still argue whether rats had dietary preferences. You mutter under your breath. But this lot definitely seems literate. It takes you hours to secure the building. You wedge traps between stacks of scrolls, sprinkle your foul mint garlic concoction near the walls, and catch 3 particularly sneaky rodents trying to make off with a page of the Psalms. By the time you leave, Your hands are ink-stained. Your back is aching, and you're pretty sure you've inhaled a few centuries' worth of dust. Back in your shed, you collapse onto your straw bed. It's damp again. You don't even care. You think about the girl. Klaus. The scroll rats. You think about the smell of the tannery and the look on Otto's face when you handed him the limp, one-eyed rat queen in a cage and said, "Here's your saboteur." You fall asleep wondering whether rats have nightmares too. The next morning begins with a nosebleed. Yours, specifically. You wake in a panic, head spinning, face sticky with blood that's dried into the straw beneath your cheek. Your throat burns with the sour taste of sleep and the acrid tang of whatever passed for supper last night. You cough, sit up too fast, and whack your head on the low beam above your bedroll. Off to a good start, you mutter, pinching your nose shut and stumbling outside. The cool air slaps your face. Somewhere in the bushes, a squirrel laughs. Or maybe it's a crow. Either way, you feel judged. The girl's already up, naturally. She's in the yard, talking to the rat again. Klaus, to be specific. "Morning," she says without turning. "You're bleeding again." "Thanks for noticing," you reply, leaning over the rain barrel and dunking your face in. The shock clears your sinuses in one instant and gives you a brain freeze the next. You gasp and stagger upright. "Letter came for you," she adds, holding up a scrap of paper. It's thick and wax-sealed, which already spells trouble. People with proper wax seals don't usually send friendly letters. You crack it open with a bit of old nail. Urgent. Dockmaster. Rat issue. Possible hazard to trade routes. Payment promised. You snort. The city never misses a chance to remind you that your profession is less about public health and more about maintaining the flow of salted herring and dyed fabrics. By mid-morning, you're trudging down the cobbled streets toward the docks, sack slung over your shoulder, tools jangling faintly with every step. The smell hits you first. Salt, fish, tar, rotting seaweed, and the unmistakable stench of rat urine. The docks are chaos. Screaming gulls circle overhead, fighting over fish scraps. Dock hands shout and curse, wagons rattle by, and the ships creak ominously as they bob at their moorings. You dodge a pile of eel guts and sidestep a boy hauling a barrel half his size. The dockmaster stands out instantly. He's red-faced, round-bellied, and has the expression of a man one comment away from murder. He sees you, waves furiously, and stomps over. "They're in the grain ship," he barks without greeting. 8 through 3 bags in one night. Weevils are easier to stomach, but rats? "Depends on the preparation," you say, too tired for tact. He does not laugh. "You want them gone?" you ask, already reaching for your trap satchel. "Gone, dead, exiled. Whatever works. Just fix it. And don't let the sailors see you fail. Morale's already lower than a whale's backside." He marches off, leaving you to face the grain ship alone. The vessel is docked at an awkward angle, like it's trying to hide its shame. You board it, duck into the hold, and pause. It's dark, and the air is thick with dust, mold, and the sharp musk of rodents. You hear them before you see them. Scrabbling feet, faint squeaks, the occasional squeal of dominance. The grain is stored in massive cloth sacks, many now torn, spilling oats like leaking guts. You set to work. The first trap is baited with smoked cheese, an expensive luxury, but rats can't resist it. The second is a trip snare. The third a weighted bucket trick you learned from an old Flemish peddler who swore it once caught 12 rats in a single night. You doubt that, but it looks impressive, and sometimes optics matter more than results. After an hour, you've caught 5 rats and chased off twice that many. You crouch in the hold, listening. You know they're watching from the corners, calculating. I know you're there, you whisper, and I know you're hungry. From above, you hear boots on the deck, followed by a familiar voice. Brought back up, says the girl. She slides down the rope ladder into the hold like she's done it 100 times. She has, probably. Let me guess, you say. You've named the rats already. Just the big one. I call him Baron Cheddarstein. He's judging you. You sigh. They all are. She helps with the traps, setting one with a quiet focus you've learned not to disturb. She has a gift for pressure triggers, probably because she once tried to design a rat-operated bell system for the city watch. It worked exactly once and caused a citywide panic about invisible burglars. By late afternoon, you've captured nearly 24 rats and scared off the rest. You present your bag of proof to the dockmaster, who grimaces but tosses you a pouch of coins. You smell like mold and despair, he adds. You pocket the silver. It's my signature scent. Later, back in your shed, you count the coins. Enough for fresh straw, a new pair of gloves, and maybe even a meat pie that isn't just gristle in crust. A good haul. But you're not done yet. That night, you're summoned. Yes, summoned to a merchant's house in the wealthier quarter. The man's name is Dürer, and he's built what can only be described as a rat moat. A trench filled with brackish water surrounds his grain store. They can't cross water, he says proudly. They can swim, you reply. He looks horrified. No, I read that rats fear water. They also fear owls, you add, but I don't see you strapping one to your chimney. He ponders that a moment longer than he should. You inspect the property. The moat is shallow, the grain store is elevated, but the stairs are made of wood, gnawed through in several places. Perfect access. Inside, there are rat droppings, a few shredded grain sacks, and a rat skeleton stuck between 2 crates. It's grinning at you. They're using the hedges to nest, you tell him. And they've built a tunnel under your moat. It's not a defense. It's a moat-themed welcome mat. He looks ready to faint. You get to work. This time, the girl brings Klaus along. The rat rides on her shoulder like a pirate's parrot. If he starts talking, I'm moving to Prague, you mutter. She smiles. Klaus prefers Nuremberg. The two of you spend hours setting traps, plugging holes, scattering dried mint and ashes. You rig a rudimentary rat funnel, a long, narrow box that guides rodents into a chamber they can't escape. You even convince the merchant to let his cat inside for a few hours. By morning, the traps are full. The merchant is begrudgingly impressed. He pays you in silver and a cured sausage, which you don't question. You've eaten worse. On the walk home, the girl talks about starting a rat training school. I could teach them to detect spoiled grain, or dance, or overthrow the city government, you add. She laughs. That's Klaus's plan. Back in your shed, you drop the sausage on the table and collapse onto your mat. Outside, the wind shifts. You can smell winter coming. You ever think about quitting? She asks, lying down beside the rat cage. All the time. Why don't you? You roll onto your side. Because if I don't do it, who will? There's a silence, a respectful one. Then, faintly, Klaus squeaks. You're not sure what he said, but you think it was something encouraging. The storm rolls in around dusk. You've just finished scrubbing rat droppings off your cloak using a fistful of sand and a prayer when the first thunderclap rattles the rickety roof of your shed. It's not a polite little rumble. This is the sort of thunder that makes your knees click and your nerves jump. You squint up at the sky, already dimming from gray to blue to an angry, sickly yellow. A sudden gust nearly takes your hood off, and the chickens in the neighbor's yard start clucking in that apocalyptic way that means good luck surviving tonight. You hurry to gather your gear, your bag of traps, your half-empty jar of peppermint paste, the dried frogs you keep forgetting to throw away, and head inside just as the rain starts. It doesn't fall gently. It slams. Like 1,000 drummers, all of them angry and offbeat, hammering down on your roof. Within minutes, the courtyard outside has turned into a shallow moat, and you've got a front row seat to a new aquatic performance. River Klaus and the mud puddles. Inside, the shed smells like a laundry basket that gave up halfway through drying. The damp straw mattress in the corner welcomes you with the familiar sigh of mildew. Klaus is in his cage, glaring with one eye and chewing on the same string he's been chewing for a week. You nod at him like a weary coworker, and he squeaks once. Probably something judgmental. You settle in, or you try to. A single, massive leak begins to form right above your usual sleeping spot. You move the mat a few feet over. The leak follows. You move it again. The ceiling mocks you with another fat drip, directly onto your pillow. You sigh, pull the pillow to your chest, and accept that dry dreams aren't in the cards tonight. Then comes the knock. You freeze. It's not the kind of knock that suggests tea and neighborly gossip. It's more like the wet smack of someone desperately using their whole palm. You shuffle to the door, undo the complicated knot of rope and splintered wood that passes for a lock, and crack it open. There's a boy outside, soaked to the bone, clutching a wooden stick like it's a sword, and he's about to face off against a dragon. His cloak is too big, his boots are mismatched, and his expression screams, "I've made several mistakes today." "You're the rat man?" he asks. You blink. "Depends. Are you here to pay me or arrest me?" Mama says they're in the bakery, in the walls, chewing the yeast and the flour sacks. His voice trembles. "Please. She says they'll ruin the Saint buns." You glance at the sky, which answers with another thunderclap. You glance at Klaus, who blinks slowly like a tired accountant. Then you grab your bag. "Fine," you mutter. "Let's go ruin their night." The walk to the bakery is pure squelching misery. Every step sinks into mud. Your boots, barely stitched together as it is, fill with water so fast you start considering whether rats have evolved little oars. The boy keeps talking. Something about sugar figurines shaped like lambs, and how one of them had been violated by a rat. You don't ask for details. Some horrors should remain unnamed. By the time you reach the bakery, your cloak weighs an extra 10 pounds, and your right boot has lost its heel somewhere in a puddle near the cooper's shop. But the bakery glows golden and warm, lit from inside by flickering hearth light, and smelling like cinnamon, yeast, and a distant whiff of panic. The baker's wife greets you with a look of someone trying not to scream. "They were on the dough bench," she hisses. "2 of them, just sitting there, like they belonged." You nod solemnly. That's a dominance move. Classic bakery infiltration tactic. She stares at you, unamused. You dust off your cloak as best you can and step into the kitchen. It's chaos. Half-kneaded dough lies forgotten on the table. A tray of misshapen pretzels sits nearby, one of them clearly gnawed. Flour dusts the air like fog, and the whole room hums with that peculiar anxiety that only bakers seem to emit. You set to work. The rats have chewed through the baseboards, and have clearly established a small empire beneath the oven. You pry up a panel and peer into the crawlspace. It's dark, warm, and smells like burnt crust and despair. You crawl halfway in, scatter mint leaves, lay out a row of baited traps, and whisper a few rat insults in low Saxon just for good measure. You wiggle back out with a crushed pretzel in your pocket and a fresh scratch on your forearm. The baker's son is watching you intently. "We built a chute," he says proudly. "It drops them right into a barrel outside." You blink. "You what?" He points to a lever near the stove. He pulls it. There's a mechanical creak, a flap opens somewhere in the wall, and 3 startled rats slide down into a bucket outside with a wet plunk. You stare. "You could have led with that." He shrugs. "Papa said it's only for emergencies." You straighten up and dust off your hands. "Well, consider this an emergency. Those rats were licking the Saint buns." The baker pays you in 2 copper coins and a still warm honey roll that you eat in one blissful, sticky bite. As you step out into the storm again, rain falling like judgment, you consider whether this life has any meaning beyond dodging plague and hoarding carbs. You squelch back to your shed, feet numb, shoulders soaked. Klaus is still awake. You swear he smirks. You flop onto your damp bedroll, cloak wrapped around your shoulders like a defeated flag. Rain drips nearby. A breeze sneaks in through a crack in the wall and smells faintly of yeast and regret. Outside, the girl hums a lullaby to something unseen. Probably Klaus's cousins. Probably an army. You fall asleep to the sound of dripping rain, the shuffle of claws in the straw, and the comforting knowledge that, for one more night, you've survived the storm. You wake to the scent of cheese, which, given the circumstances, is far more alarming than pleasant. Not fresh cheese, mind you. Not the kind that makes you think of goats nibbling grass on an alpine hill. No, this is cellar cheese. Forgotten cheese. The kind that's moved beyond the laws of dairy into the realm of folklore. The kind of cheese you could use to summon a minor demon if you whispered the right words to it. You sit up with a groan, your joints popping like firewood, and find a small lump of it wrapped in a cabbage leaf next to your bedroll. You blink at it, then glance over at Klaus, who's sitting oddly still in his cage. You didn't. You begin. He tilts his head. You pick up the cheese, give it a cautious sniff, then wrap it back up and toss it onto the crate you call a pantry/chair/nightstand. The cabbage leaf might be useful later. Dinner, pillow stuffing, makeshift bandage. Possibilities abound. As you rise and stretch, there's a scratching sound near the base of the shed wall. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, scamper. You sigh. It's going to be one of those days. You open the door just as the sun peeks out over the slate rooftops and the smell of wet cobblestone. Yesterday's smoke and this morning's manure hits you like an old friend with bad breath. The girl is outside, barefoot again, crouched in the dirt with a rat on each shoulder. She looks up and waves. "They're learning tricks," she says cheerfully. "That's nice," you mutter. "Just remember, they don't get paid until the act is street legal." She giggles and disappears down the alley, rats in tow. You pinch the bridge of your nose, then you grab your bag and head out. Today's route includes 3 inns, 1 butcher, and the town's apothecary, who insists her herbs are rat-proof, though the droppings in her licorice root jar suggest otherwise. The first stop is the Turnip and Flagon, a drinking hole frequented by shepherds, traveling salesmen, and that one guy who plays the hurdy-gurdy like it owes him money. The innkeeper greets you with a nod and a mug of weak beer. "They're in the cellar again," he grumbles. "Chewed right through the barley sack. Then one of 'em passed out in the mead barrel. Found it floating this morning. Looked like it was smiling." You descend into the cellar, lantern in hand. It's damp, of course. Everything underground in this town is damp. Stone walls sweating like they've run a marathon. Your boots squelch through puddles of spilled ale and something that might once have been pickled herring. The rat in the mead barrel is, indeed, smiling, or at least grinning in the way that a waterlogged rodent corpse can. You fish it out with a ladle, mutter a prayer, and set to work. This is the part no one sees. The hours of crawling behind barrels. The traps that snap shut on your fingers. The way a rat will look you dead in the eye before vanishing into a hole too small for your dignity to follow. You bait traps with sausage rind and mint paste. You plug holes with rags soaked in vinegar. You mutter to yourself, to the rats, to the gods, to the ceiling. And then you find it. The nest. Tucked behind a loose board, tucked away in an old cider crate, is a bundle of straw, feathers, and fabric scraps, all woven into a tiny bed. In it, 5 baby rats, all blinking up at you like you're their long-lost uncle. You pause. You sigh. You relocate them, gently, to the hedgerow behind the apothecary's shop. Maybe they'll find religion. Or cheese. By the time you're done, your back is screaming. Your knees sound like a pair of maracas, and your right boot has sprung another leak. You trudge back upstairs, accept a bowl of stew as payment, and try not to think about what part of the goat it might be made from. At the butcher's, things are worse. "They've taken the liver," the butcher says, gesturing to an empty tray. "Just all of it. Not even a smear left." You squint. "Are you sure your dog didn't?" "No dog would be that neat." "Rats. It's organized. I can feel it." You don't argue. You don't have the energy. Instead, you inspect the meat hooks, set traps near the bone bin, and discover a trail of tiny footprints leading up to the ceiling beams. You follow them. You climb a ladder. You poke your head into the rafters. You regret this immediately. A rat stares back at you, wearing a sliver of bacon like a cape. You stare. It chitters once, then disappears into the shadows. You climb back down slowly. Do you have any holy water?" you ask the butcher. He just points to the schnapps bottle. You take a swig. It burns all the way down. Your final stop of the day is the apothecary's shop, where dried plants hang like a wizard's laundry, and everything smells faintly of licorice and regret. The apothecary is a tall, severe woman with a pet ferret named Meinrad, and a stubborn belief in the power of cloves. "They're getting bold," she tells you, gesturing to a jar of dried nettle. One sat on the shelf and ate fennel seed like a nobleman at a feast. You nod and begin your inspection. Sure enough, there's a trail of droppings leading to a cupboard near the floor. You open it. 2 rats blink at you. One is chewing lavender. The other is curled up in a teacup. You close the door slowly. "Have you considered surrender?" you ask. She snorts. "Never." So you get to work. By the time you return home, the sky is fading to copper, and the air smells like chimney smoke and cold soup. Your shed awaits like a loyal, moldy friend. Klaus is asleep, curled in his blanket like a furry judgment. You collapse onto your mat and close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a hurdy-gurdy begins to play. You sigh. One more day done. One more plague, narrowly postponed. You dream of bacon-caped rats and Saint buns. The next morning, you wake before the sun, not out of virtue, but because the roof has sprung a leak directly above your sleeping mat. Cold water hits your forehead like a vengeful droplet from the gods, and you jolt upright, knocking over Klaus's water bowl in the process. He squeaks in protest and shoots you a look that says, quite clearly, "You ruined my dream about beetles." You mop at your face with the least filthy corner of your sleeve and sit for a moment in the pre-dawn dimness, listening to the gentle drip, drip, drip of the roof and wondering whether life has always been like this, or whether you've somehow made a series of poor life choices culminating in damp, rat-catching poverty. Breakfast is a heel of bread, a questionable apple, and some of the cheese from yesterday, which is not improved with time. You briefly consider boiling it to sterilize it, but realize the effort would outweigh the reward. You gnaw it while packing your satchel with traps, cord, dried mint leaves, a strip of salted fish, and Klaus, who climbs in willingly. He knows the drill by now. Today's big job is in the grain warehouse down by the river, a cavernous, stone-walled building with terrible light, worse ventilation, and approximately 3,000 hiding places for rats. The miller who owns it is a squat man with enormous ears and a permanently suspicious squint. He greets you with the kind of enthusiasm one usually reserves for tax collectors. "They're nesting in the sacks," he says, already halfway into a rant. You pull one out, 4 more pop out the bottom. I've tried dogs, I've tried smoke, I even let a barn owl loose in there. It left. Didn't even try. You nod solemnly. Smart owl. Inside the warehouse, it smells like damp wheat, sweat, and rodent defiance. The sunlight filters in through a few high slats, casting dusty shafts of gold that illuminate the occasional flicker of movement. Just enough to make you paranoid. Klaus perches on your shoulder, whiskers twitching. You begin your sweep with methodical resignation. Each sack is a potential fortress. You tap them, lift corners, check for movement. In one, you find a rat who has constructed what can only be described as a bachelor pad, complete with shredded pamphlet rug and a tiny pile of sunflower seeds arranged in a pattern suspiciously like a spiral. Historians might debate whether rats had a spiritual sense, but in this moment, you can't shake the idea that this little guy was mid-ritual. You evict him with gentle firmness and continue. At one point, you disturb a family of rats who flee in synchronized chaos, one of them with a piece of paper in its mouth. You glimpse it just long enough to read the words, "Municipal Grain Record." You sigh. Bureaucratic theft, again. By mid-morning, you've set over 20 traps, sealed 2 holes, and disposed of at least 10 nesting sites. Your back hurts, your fingers are stained from handling old rope, and your stomach growls like an angry spirit. You take a short break on an overturned crate and watch Klaus sniff around a pile of broom bristles. Nearby, the miller's apprentice, a pimply youth with hay for hair, offers you a wedge of something that might once have been pear pie. "I found it in the corner," he says helpfully. You decline, politely but firmly. After your break, you ascend the warehouse loft to investigate reports of rats dropping from the ceiling. This turns out to be exaggerated, mostly. A few have indeed made homes in the rafters, hanging their nests like festive, disease-ridden garlands. One particularly enterprising rodent has dragged half a wool mitten up there and fashioned it into a sort of hammock. You admire the ingenuity for a moment. Then you evict him. You lower your sack of gear back down by rope, a slow process made slower by the constant creaking of the pulley system, and your fear of sudden decapitation. Klaus climbs down your arm like a furry accordion and returns to his preferred spot in your satchel. By the time you declare the warehouse temporarily uninhabitable by large colonies, it's mid-afternoon. The miller grunts his approval and tosses you a few copper pfennigs, enough for a hot meal or one clean sock, but not both. You thank him because politeness is free and start the long walk back up the hill. On your way, you're intercepted by the town steward, a man who looks like a sentient ledger. He informs you that the council wants an official rat census by week's end. You stare at him. A what? A count, he says, to track the population. You blink. Of the rats? He nods. Yes, all of them. How am I supposed to? Just estimate. Round up. You consider arguing. Then you remember your cheese breakfast and nod. Fine. I'll start tomorrow. Your next stop is a quick visit to Frau Elsbeth, the widow who swears the rats in her garden are stealing her prayers. Not her bread. Not her seedlings. Her prayers. You humor her, set a trap by the basil pot, and smile when she gives you a stale cookie as payment. It's hard as bone, but you pocket it anyway. Might make a good doorstop. As evening settles in, you return to your shed. Your hands are raw, your boots have somehow gotten wetter, and there's a splinter in your thigh that's arguing with your dignity. You light a small oil lamp and settle down, Klaus curling beside you. Dinner is a stew cobbled together from onion ends, potato peel, and something you suspect is turnip, but might also be a chunk of flour. It's warm, it's edible, it'll do. As the fire dims and the shadows stretch longer across the walls, you lean back and listen. Somewhere outside, the faint sound of music rises. A fiddler practicing near the inn, perhaps. You imagine the rats in the warehouse swaying along to the beat, tiny hands clapping. You shake your head. Maybe you've been at this too long. And yet, you can't deny a certain pride. It's dirty, thankless work, but you're good at it. You know their habits, their tricks. You know how to outsmart them most days. Besides, someone has to keep the cheese safe. You blow out the lamp and let the quiet wrap around you. Klaus snores. Outside, something scurries. But not here. Not tonight. You've earned this moment of peace. You're roused at dawn the next morning by the smell of Klaus's breath directly in your face, and the sound of a rooster that has, once again, stationed itself directly beneath your window. You don't own a rooster. You've never owned a rooster. And yet, here he is, every single day, as if taunting you with his punctuality. You rise slowly, every joint creaking in protest, and make a mental note to add, look into rooster situation somewhere below, invent waterproof boots, and become wealthy enough to buy real butter. Klaus stretches luxuriously and climbs into your satchel before you've even fastened your belt, like a prince assuming his throne. Today, your primary mission is both ridiculous and strangely terrifying. The rat census. You honestly didn't think the steward was serious, but as you walk toward the town square, you're intercepted by one of his assistants, a lanky teen wearing an ill-fitting tabard and an expression of bureaucratic glee. He hands you a parchment. It's all laid out. Quadrants, rat sightings, nest counts. Be thorough. You stare at the parchment. It's blank. He beams. That's where you come in. You consider many responses, including the word fire, but settle for a long-suffering sigh. Fine. Let's count rats. You begin in the fishmonger's alley, a place that smells exactly like you'd imagine a 1490s fish alley would. Rats love it naturally. You spot 7 almost immediately, including one so fat it has to squeeze sideways between crates. You mark it down as one large rat, possible crime boss. Next is the churchyard. Surprisingly quiet. You see a few droppings, a gnawed hymn book, and a trail of sunflower seed shells that leads nowhere. You log this as suspicious activity, possibly religious rodents. Historians still argue whether rodents were drawn to certain sacred structures, or if it's simply that churches provided excellent warmth and forgotten bread crusts. You, however, suspect it's the acoustics. Rats love a good echo. Klaus does his best to help, darting ahead into nooks and crannies, returning every so often to drop a bit of fur or whisker in your hand, as if saying, "Look, I found evidence." You pat him on the head and log it as fur sample, Klaus assisted. Around midday, you stop at the bakery. The baker is a jovial woman with flour permanently embedded in her elbows. She greets you with a tired smile and a meat pie. "No rats today," she says, or at least no more than usual. You log this as stable rat presence, non-emergent, and eat half the pie before you've even thanked her. It's the best thing you've tasted in weeks, and you briefly consider proposing marriage, if only to secure lifetime access to her pies. But then she mentions having 6 children, all of them prone to stealing rat traps and turning them into toys, and you decide against it. You move on. The tannery is next, always an unpleasant stop. The stench alone could fell an ox. Rats love it here too, not for the hides or the chaos, but for the cool shadows and quiet corners. You count at least 15, some of them darting boldly across your path as if daring you to try something. One appears to have a missing tail and a scar above its left eye. You narrow your gaze. We meet again. Klaus growls. You mark it down as repeat offender, possibly named Bruno. By late afternoon, you've filled 3 full sheets of parchment, each more ridiculous than the last. You've identified potential rat factions, mapped out turf wars, and speculated about one alley that may or may not be used for secret rat duels. At one point, you find a rat that appears to have a bead tied around its neck with a string. You pause, stunned. Is this jewelry? You mark it. Adorned rat, possible cult? This is where things become complicated. You stop by the apothecary to ask if any recent potions might cause hallucinations, but he just squints at you and offers a tonic that smells like boiled cabbage and regret. You decline. As the sun begins to dip behind the hills, you make your way back to the steward's office, parchment rolls clutched in one hand, Klaus nibbling crumbs from the other. The steward eyes your work, then flips through the pages with a raised eyebrow. "What's this here? Rodent lord suspected near well?" You nod. Very charismatic rat, possibly organizing the others. He frowns. "You're not taking this seriously." "I'm the only person in this town who has personally negotiated a rat standoff near the sausage stall. I take this very seriously." There's a long silence. Then he sighs and stamps your papers. "Fine. Good enough. For now." You're halfway home when you realize you've stepped in something. Not mud, not excrement. No, it's worse. Glue. Someone has set up a glue trap in the alley behind the tailor's shop, and you, being completely fried from 12 hours of rat-related nonsense, walk directly into it. Your foot is stuck. You tip forward. Klaus jumps for safety. You spend a full 10 minutes trying to detach your boot without losing your sock. It's undignified, sticky, and ends with you hopping down the alley in one shoe, holding the other like a cursed relic. You finally make it back to your shed, slam the door, and flop face down on your bed. "Never again," you mutter. Klaus climbs up onto your back and purrs, or possibly vibrates with judgment. You roll over and stare at the ceiling. There's a new crack. It looks vaguely like a rat. You sigh and cover your face with your arm. Dinner is a crust, a turnip scrap, and a cup of lukewarm beer someone gave you 3 days ago. You toast the air, then drink it down. As you drift into sleep, 1,000 tiny scratches echo in your memory. Rats, counted and uncounted. Klaus, dreaming of glory. Abi adviselo egerur, aki lehet vaginem lehet velocigos. Historians may debate your sanity, but none will question your dedication. And if you dream of tiny rat governments holding tiny rat elections, well, that's between you and your pillow. You wake to the soft skitter of paws. Klaus, already alert and prowling around the rafters like he's guarding a castle rather than your humble rat catcher's shack. Outside, the light has barely turned from gray to gold, and for a moment you consider just rolling over and letting the day go on without you. But that's not the kind of life you lead. In 1490s Germany, if you want to sleep in, you need to be nobility, clergy, or dead. You sit up with a groan and reach for your boots, still tacky with glue from yesterday's humiliating encounter. Klaus gives you a look that says, "I would have avoided that trap." You mutter something under your breath about opposable thumbs and slap your boots on anyway. Today, you've been summoned to a farmstead outside the town walls. It's one of those requests that comes with a purse of copper coins so light it might as well be empty, but the note is laced with desperation. Apparently, the rats have taken over the barn. Not just gnawing at feed sacks or stealing oats, full-on occupation. Like a siege, the note read. They don't even run when we approach. Curious and slightly flattered, you pack up Klaus, grab your staff, and begin the long trudge through fields wet with dew and cow droppings. The farmstead is exactly what you'd expect. Timber framed, roof sagging like a tired brow, and with chickens that stare at you with thinly veiled contempt. A young woman meets you at the gate, wringing her hands in that universal, "We are very, very out of options" gesture. They've made a nest in the hayloft, she explains. My husband swears they're planning something. They squeak at each other in patterns. Like codes? She nods gravely. There's one that seems to be in charge. He stands on the beam and watches. You suppress a smile. Describe him. Gray, long tail, one ear chewed off. We've started calling him Captain. Of course you have. You climb the ladder into the hayloft cautiously. Klaus hops up behind you, his pupils already dilated with battle focus. And, sure enough, there they are, over a dozen rats clustered like a parliament, all staring as you emerge. Captain stands on a beam, backlit by a shaft of morning light, his torn ear giving him the silhouette of a seasoned war hero. He doesn't move, doesn't flinch, just stares. You lift your staff in greeting. Klaus growls. The standoff lasts maybe 10 seconds before the rats scatter. Most disappear into the shadows. Captain holds your gaze a moment longer, then vanishes with a flick of his tail. You saw that, right? You whisper. Klaus sneezes, which you take as agreement. The rest of the day is spent shoring up the barn, setting baited traps, plugging holes with scrap cloth and stone, and sprinkling the corners with powdered mint and garlic. 2 cents rats supposedly hate, though you suspect they just make everything smell like a peasant's soup. The farmer's son helps, a gangly boy of about 12 with a mop of hay-colored hair and an endless supply of questions. Is it true rats can climb walls? Yes. Can they open doors? Only if someone else forgets to latch them. Do they ever talk? You pause. To each other? Sure. They squeak. to people? Only after 3 pints of strong cider and a head injury. He laughs, and you realize with a pang that he reminds you of your younger self. Before the fleas, before the glue traps, before you spent more time with rats than humans. By dusk, the barn is fortified. You sit with the family on a bench made from a split log and eat boiled roots and cheese that's hard enough to chip teeth. It's not glamorous, but it's warm, and the stars begin to prick through the twilight like shy fireflies. You're welcome to stay the night, the woman offers. We have a spare pallet in the stable. You almost decline, but then Klaus gives a long yawn and curls up on the farmer's son's lap like he's decided this family is worthy of protection. You sigh and nod. The stable is musty but clean. You lie on the pallet, straw rustling beneath you, and watch the rafters for movement. None comes. Maybe Captain has retreated for now. Maybe he's regrouping. You're halfway to sleep when the boy appears beside you, barefoot and nervous. Can I ask one more thing? Sure. Do you think the rats hate us? I mean, we're always trying to kill them. You sit up slightly, caught off guard by the question. I don't know. I think rats are just trying to live, like we are. Find food, stay warm, have little rat families. He nods slowly. So, they're not evil? Number just inconvenient. He grins. That's what my mom says about my uncle. You chuckle, and he scurries back to the house. You lie there a long time after that, listening to the horses breathing, the wind through the trees, the soft hush of Klaus's tail flicking. You wonder if Captain is watching you even now, from some hidden corner, evaluating your methods, your attitude. You wonder what he would say if he could speak. You're tired, you imagine him saying in a raspy little voice. Your boots stink. Your traps are predictable, but you're persistent. You smile. Maybe persistence is all you have going for you these days. That and Klaus. At dawn, you rise, stretch, and leave a small pouch of herbs behind for the family. A mix that repels rodents naturally. They'll probably never use it, but the gesture matters. Back in town, the streets are unusually quiet. A storm is coming. You can feel it in your knees. The baker waves from her doorway. The blacksmith is sweeping the forge. You pass the steward's hall, where a messenger is posting a fresh notice. You pause to read it. Wanted. Rat catcher for royal inspection preparations. Your stomach drops. Of all the rotten luck, some minor noble, perhaps even someone from the emperor's court, is coming to town, and they want it spotless. And by spotless, they mean no visible vermin, no droppings, no suspicious gnaw marks. You sigh. This is going to be a nightmare. You walk home, already composing the list in your mind. Clean every alley. Reinforce every cellar. Hide every rat. Klaus will need a bath, and you'll need a new hat, preferably one that doesn't smell like dead stoat. As you reach your door, you hear a tiny scratching noise from your roof. You look up. There he is, Captain, sitting like a gargoyle on your thatch, tail curled, ear fluttering in the wind. You stare at each other. This time, you raise your hand not in greeting, but in warning. He scampers away. You whisper, "Game on." You know what they say. Nothing gets a town to clean up its act quite like the threat of nobility dropping by. And in late 15th century Germany, that means an endless parade of scrub brushes, vinegar, and increasingly frantic municipal meetings where someone always suggests that maybe, just maybe, we should invent plumbing. You, however, don't have the luxury of meetings. As the town's unofficial, underpaid, and only marginally appreciated rat catcher, you've just been handed a personal invitation to madness. Prepare the entire West Quarter for noble inspection. No rodents, no droppings, no suspicious rodent odor. Suspicious rodent odor? You'd argue that's the natural aroma of every building older than 10 years. Still, orders are orders. So you get up at sunrise, armed with your standard kit: iron-toothed traps, sulfur candles, a mixture of goose fat and powdered hemlock for bait, and Klaus, looking unusually energized for a cat who normally begins his day with a nap. Maybe he senses what's coming. Or maybe he just had good dreams about chasing Captain off your roof. The West Quarter is mostly merchant homes and storage houses. It's where the fabric dyers live, which means the entire street smells like a mix of spoiled wine, moldy linen, and faint, unsettling hints of crushed beetle. You try not to breathe too deeply as you step through the narrow lanes. You start at the tailor's house. He's a fussy man with a beard like unraveling yarn, and fingers stained blue from woad. He's already in a panic. "They're in the walls," he whispers. "I hear them at night. Scritch, scratch, like they're coming to measure me for a coffin." You offer him a sage nod and set to work. Sure enough, you find signs. Gnawed beams, droppings like grim punctuation marks in the corners, and a nest tucked behind a loose stone in the hearth. It's small, barely big enough for 2 rats, but it's a reminder. Where there's one, there are 10 more waiting for their moment. You light a sulfur candle and seal the hearth. The tailor protests. "I'll suffocate." "Only if you stick your face down the chimney," you reply. You leave him flapping his apron by the window and move on to the apothecary's shop. This one's worse. Racks of dried herbs, open jars of honey, and powdered rhubarb in the corners make for a rodent buffet. You count 5 rats in the rafters before Klaus even climbs onto the counter. The apothecary, to his credit, doesn't scream. He just sighs and pours you a mug of something thick and green. "Wormwood tea," he says. "Keeps the rats away. Or possibly attracts more. Historians still argue whether its scent is a deterrent or a dinner bell." You sip politely and almost gag. Klaus glares at your mug like he wants to slap it out of your hand. "I'll take my chances with vinegar," you say, and begin your inspection. You spend the rest of the morning patching holes, sprinkling mint and ash, and installing traps baited with goose fat. You find 3 nests, one under the stairs, one in a jar of dried figs, and one disturbingly well insulated with hair. You don't ask where the hair came from. By midday, you're drenched in sweat and starting to question every life decision you've made since the age of 12. Klaus disappears somewhere around the 4th attic, and when you find him again, he's curled around a single dead rat like a dragon with treasure. You scratch behind his ears and promise him an extra bit of fish tonight. The real trouble starts in the granary. It's a huge, vaulted stone building near the river, and it's packed to the rafters with sacks of barley, rye, and spelt. And it reeks of rat. The steward meets you at the door, wringing his cap in his hands like it owes him money. "They say the rats here. Organize," he whispers. "They know when we're coming. They scatter before we arrive, and when we return, the traps are sprung and empty." You nod slowly. "Captain?" He blinks. "You've named him. Every good general needs a rival." Inside the granary, the air is thick with dust and tension. You set your traps, scatter your ash, and post Klaus like a sentry. But something's off. There's no movement, no scurrying, no telltale sound of claws on stone. It's too quiet. You poke around the sacks, lift the floorboards, check the beams, and then you see it. A hole in the far corner, freshly dug, just wide enough for a particularly clever rat to wriggle through. You shine a candle inside. Tunnel. You blink. Rats don't dig tunnels, not unless they're absolutely desperate or absolutely brilliant. You lie flat, nose inches from the dirt, and peer deeper. The tunnel twists, curves down, and vanishes into darkness. Your candle flickers. You think you hear squeaking, low, rhythmic, deliberate. Morse code for rodents. You crawl back out and sit on the ground, dusting off your knees. They're not just surviving, you mutter. They're adapting. You've never felt more exhausted or more impressed. That night, you write a report to the city steward. You leave out the tunnel, the communication, the possibility of a rat-led uprising. You just say, granary secure. Recommend regular inspections. Avoid storing figs. Then, because you're tired and probably a little delirious, you draw a tiny crown next to a sketch of Captain. Just a little doodle, nothing official. You sleep badly. Dreams of tunnels. Klaus leading an army. Captain sitting on a throne of bones, wearing your missing glove like a robe. In the morning, there's a knock on your door. A boy with a letter. Sealed with wax. Royal wax. You break it open with trembling hands. It's short, polite, but terrifying. The noble party will arrive in 4 days' time. The sanitation of the town will be inspected by a representative of the court. We are told your services have been adequate. Adequate. You scoff. Then you read the last line. Please ensure no disruptions. Any rodent sightings will reflect poorly on the host. You reread it twice. Disruptions. Sightings. It's like they expect a parade of rats to burst into the square during lunch. You glance at Klaus, who blinks lazily. I swear, if Captain stages a performance during inspection week, I'm switching careers. Klaus yawns. The tunnel still haunts you. Not because it was clever, but because it wasn't finished. Captain is planning something. And you've got 4 days to find out what. You wake up before dawn the next day with a pit in your stomach and a single question echoing in your head like a cathedral bell. What, exactly, is Captain planning? The granary tunnel wasn't just an escape route. It was an omen. A sign that your most cunning adversary isn't just dodging traps anymore. He's outmaneuvering you. So, you do what any self-respecting professional would do. You call in reinforcements. And by reinforcements, you mean your cousin Dieter. Dieter is technically a locksmith, but really he's just someone who enjoys taking things apart, occasionally putting them back together, and boasting that he once made a catapult out of a rocking chair and some cabbage netting. You're not sure he'll be useful, but he's the only person you know who isn't squeamish about tunnels or rats, or logic. When you explain the situation, Dieter squints at you over a hunk of rye bread. So, let me get this straight. You think this rat, Captain, is orchestrating some kind of siege? I think he's planning something disruptive, like crashing the noble's inspection. You nod. Exactly. Dieter grins. I'm in. And just like that, Operation Rat Reconnaissance begins. The two of you head back to the granary with picks, spades, lanterns, and a wheel of cheese. Bait, bribe, or dinner, depending on how things go. You crawl into the tunnel first, while Dieter mutters vague encouragement from behind and occasionally asks if you've found any treasure yet. The tunnel slopes downward, cool and damp, the walls just wide enough to scrape your shoulders. After 10 yards, it splits. You glance back, and Dieter hands you a scrap of chalk. Mark your turns, he says. Otherwise, we'll be the ones who don't come back. Good point. Left, right, left again. The tunnel deepens. It's not random. You can see where stone has been cleared, where dirt has been packed to form steps, This isn't just a burrow, it's engineering. Rat engineering. You whisper, half to yourself. Historians still argue whether rodents truly grasp spatial planning. Dieter snorts behind you. Well, I think they've settled it here. Suddenly, the tunnel opens into a chamber. A rat chamber. You freeze. It's dim, lit only by your lantern's glow, but you can make out the edges. A rounded room with scattered scraps. Bits of parchment, feathers, dry leaves, tiny twigs. Nesting materials, yes. But also, maps. You step closer. On the dirt floor is a scrawled outline. Shapes formed from tiny stones and bits of bone. It's the town. Crude, but unmistakable. And in the center, marked with a shiny coin, the market square. You exhale. This isn't survival. This is strategy. Captain is organizing a public appearance, right at the heart of town, during the inspection. The question isn't why, but how. You turn back to Dieter. I need to find every tunnel, now. Dieter just stares at the rodent map, eyebrows raised. I'm going to be telling people about this until I die. You spend the rest of the day tracing tunnels. You mark every offshoot, every pocket, every route that leads toward the center of town. It's a network, a proper, living network. By sunset, you've charted 7 active paths, 2 abandoned ones, and one that ends in a stolen thimble and what might be a mouse shrine. You emerge filthy, coughing, and mildly traumatized, but victorious. Sort of. Because now you know something else. The rats aren't just building tunnels, they're building a performance. Dieter says it best over his 3rd beer that evening. They're not trying to escape. They're trying to be seen. That night, you can't sleep. Not because of nightmares, though those come later. Because you keep imagining Captain in a little rat-sized cloak, standing on a barrel in the market square, addressing a crowd of nobles like a tiny revolutionary. The next morning, you meet with the mayor. You explain everything. Tunnels, patterns, potential rat parade. He listens patiently, then blinks. So, you're saying the rats are planning a protest? You nod. Do you have any proof? You show him the map, the tunnel sketches, even the drawing of Captain you made weeks ago. The mayor squints. He looks a bit like you, he says. That's not the point. The mayor sighs. Very well. What do you suggest? Block the tunnels, all of them. Quietly. No fanfare, no panic. And if they dig more, then I dig faster. You leave the meeting with a strange sense of purpose. You're no longer a mere rat catcher. You're a crisis manager. For the next 2 days, you work like a man possessed. You stuff tunnels with plaster and stones. You smoke out nests. You scatter powdered mint like confetti and post Klaus at every corner. The city holds its breath. And then the nobles arrive. 3 carriages, 4 attendants. One very bored-looking duchess with a feather taller than your entire hat. They tour the town. They smile at the fountain. They taste the bread. They make approving noises at the town square's cleanliness and the refreshing lack of visible rats. You hold your breath. No parades. No squeaks. No captain. It's too quiet. As the inspection ends, the mayor beams. All thanks to our tireless rat catcher, he says, and gestures toward you. You blink. You bow. And then, there it is. A single rat. Bold. Alone. Sitting atop the merchant's stall in full view. Captain. He stares at you. You stare back. Then, slowly, he stands on his hind legs and bows. You swear. It's brief. A beat, no more. But it's real. And then he's gone, vanishing into the crates like a ghost. The nobles don't notice. Or if they do, they assume it's part of the rustic charm. But you know, you've been spared. This wasn't defeat. It was détente. an armistice between predator and prey, between human and rodent. Later, you sit by your fire, Klaus in your lap, and think. Captain isn't just a rat. He's an idea. And worse, he might be teaching others. You sip your beer and murmur to Klaus, I'm not a rat catcher anymore. I'm a rat diplomat. Klaus burps. You laugh. But in the shadows, you think you hear the soft scritch of claws. Not a threat, just a reminder. Captain is still out there, and you'll see him again. You wake up the next morning with a strange new feeling you can't quite name. It's not fear, exactly. Not the jittery, goosebump-raising dread that had lodged itself like a burr in your chest during the rat siege weeks before. It's not triumph either. No swell of victory, no celebratory fist pump. No, this is something subtler. Stranger, like awe, maybe. Or admiration. Because, let's be honest, Captain pulled it off. Not the grand parade of vermin you feared, not the nightmarish deluge of rats marching in coordinated rank and file across the town square, but something quieter, more elegant, one single appearance, one perfect, dignified moment, a bow, a statement, no squealing chaos, no gnawed timber, just presence, just proof. And now you're living with it. Every corner you turn in town, you half expect to see that flick of a tail disappearing into the shadows. You're not paranoid anymore, just aware. Keenly, almost politely aware. Like you and Captain are two retired rivals who meet once a year for tea, just to acknowledge the balance. Not enemies, not quite allies, fellow custodians of an unspoken agreement. But you can't shake the question, what now? Your official duties have dropped back to routine. The mayor now sends polite notes every few days, asking whether the rat situation remains respectably dormant. You respond with equally polite affirmations about bait placement, population trends, and the strategic use of smoked herring oil. You still go on patrol, still set traps, though you do so with a gentler touch. Still offer the occasional rat facts to school children on field trips, though these days the facts are more philosophical. You've stopped viewing rats as mere pests. You aren't just fighting them anymore. You're observing them. One breezy afternoon, you spend a solid hour crouched beside the flour mill, watching a cluster of young rats maneuver a walnut up a stone step. No humans. No interference. Just rats working together like tiny, squeaky laborers on a construction site. You should be irritated. You should throw a shoe. Instead, you take mental notes. They form a wedge formation. They pivot with calculated precision. One of them, smaller than the rest, nudges a twig beneath the walnut like a fulcrum. A rat lever. You whisper to yourself. Historians still argue whether rodents truly understand basic mechanical principles. But deep down, you know, they do. Back at home, you start to keeping a journal. You title it with no small amount of flair. Field observations, Muridae intelligence, and tactical behavior. It's mostly scribbles, yes, some drawings, a few diagrams, and the occasional ink blot where Klaus decided to nap. But it's yours, a personal chronicle of your strange little descent into, well, not madness, but maybe fascination. And honestly, it's good, genuinely good. You start organizing your entries, you label behaviors, you develop a system of symbols, little triangles for collaborative movement, dots for tool use, and squiggly lines for unexplained rat shenanigans. The archive is growing. On a whim, you even dig out one of those dusty tomes from the monastery library, De Bestis et Animalibus. Latin, archaic, written in the sort of ink that smells like mildew and poorly concealed theological debate. but it's full of surprises. There's a page, crease-worn and speckled with candle wax, showing a rat perched on a man's shoulder, whispering into his ear. The caption reads, Mus sapientissimus, Counselor of Kings. You stare at it for a long time. Could Captain have been someone's familiar in another life? A spirit guide? A scheming advisor with an impressive, tiny mustache? The idea no longer seems absurd. That week, you visit the herbalist. Not because you're sick, but because she always has excellent cheese and mildly judgmental cats. You casually mention your observations, expecting a smirk or a laugh. But she doesn't laugh. Instead, she invites you into her back garden and points to the hollow roots of an old fig tree. They've been nesting here for years, she says, tapping the soil gently. I just let them be. They like the elderberry, makes their fur shiny. You peer into the roots, squinting. Sure enough, a neat line of paw prints marches across the dirt like a trail of tiny signatures. Clean, straight, purposeful. You feel a flicker of excitement. On your walk home, a small child scampers up beside you, wide-eyed, clutching a potato like it's a sacred relic. Are you the man who talks to rats? You blink. Not exactly. My sister says you made a rat bow to a duchess. You chuckle. Number that was his idea. She considers this gravely, then holds out the potato. For the rat. You take it. Thank you. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. You don't tell her Captain prefers walnuts. The weeks pass. No new infestations. No nests in the bakery. No chewing through barrel staves. No alarming sounds from beneath the town hall. Just peace. Or maybe coexistence. Your traps remain untouched. Your bait vanishes, but only with courtesy. No mess. No droppings. Just the faint suggestion that it's been accepted, like a diplomatic offering. It's as if the rats have declared a ceasefire in exchange for recognition. You're no longer the enemy. You're the observer. One overcast morning, you walk past the granary again and feel a tug in your chest. The tunnel system. Something's calling you back. You duck inside. It's dim and dusty. Quiet, except for the faint creak of the rafters and the distant drip of old rain. Then you see it. A mark, carved gently into the dirt wall. A symbol. 3 intersecting lines forming a shape like a compass rose, or perhaps a crossroads. Deliberate, clean. It wasn't there before. You reach out and trace it with your fingertip. A rat glyph. You don't know what it means, but it hums with intent. Like a chapter beginning. That night, you sit by the hearth, Klaus curled up against your ankles like a disgruntled hot water bottle, and read your own journal entries aloud, just to hear them spoken, to make the knowledge real. You pause at the page with Captain's drawing. You've given him a cape this time, and a monocle, and, for no particular reason, a cane. It's a joke, mostly. But part of you wonders, would he wear it, if presented politely? You imagine him perched on a wine crate in a dusty tunnel, addressing a young rat assembly. We do not chew for chaos, we chew for legacy. Klaus grunts. Too much? You ask. He snores. You smile and close the journal. Outside, the wind picks up slightly. A rustle across the shutters, a whisper under the roof tiles. Not quite a warning. Not quite a message, just awareness. The city breathes, and somewhere beneath your feet, Captain is still watching, still planning, still keeping score. You hope he knows you're doing the same. Tomorrow, you'll walk the back alleys again. You'll visit the old wine cellar, maybe even bring a walnut or two, just in case the peace needs renewing. But tonight, you rest. You've earned it. You weren't just a rat catcher. You were part of something bigger, something squeaky, something strange, something almost noble. You awaken before dawn, as the first threads of light begin to loosen the heavy darkness. The town is still asleep, curled beneath its thatched blankets and crooked chimneys. Even the roosters haven't bothered to announce themselves yet. But you, well, you're awake, and not because of a rat, a trap, or a summons. You're simply up. The air feels different today. Not heavy with tension, not thick with soot or damp hay. Lighter. Like it's been swept out overnight, as if someone, or something, decided to freshen things up for your final patrol. You don your boots with practiced rhythm, fingers tying laces before your mind is even fully alert. Klaus watches with one eye open, his tail flicking once in mild disapproval, then curling back into sleep. You chuckle quietly and pat his belly. He responds by biting your hand, lazily but with enough enthusiasm to remind you who's boss. Today's walk takes you through the oldest part of town, the fishmonger's row, where even the rats tread lightly in fear of the salted cod stench. Then down by the abandoned dye pits, still faintly blue from centuries of fabric work. Here, the rats were once rowdy, intoxicated by the leftover matter and woad. Now they're gone, or simply respectful. The path curls beneath a low archway of timber beams, and you duck automatically. You know every step of this loop, but today you're not setting traps. You carry no sack of bait, no sharp stick, no fresh chalk to mark the walls, just your journal and an old walnut. As you pass the granary, you pause. That tunnel, Captain's Tunnel, is quiet, but the symbol remains, carefully preserved beneath a small canopy of woven twigs. A shield, perhaps, or a tribute, or, in the rat world, a handshake. You place the walnut beside it, not with ceremony, just acknowledgement. It's strange. You've come to feel less like a rat catcher and more like a participant in a very small, very squeaky court. A whispering diplomacy between species. One built not on dominance or extermination, but on curiosity, on mutual tolerance. And somehow that feels right. You continue walking, pausing now and then to scratch a note in your journal. Observed minor tunnel reinforcements behind bakery. Possible bait trading behavior. Rats may be negotiating over cheese fragments. Noticed twine knot near sewer grates. Knot was unusually intricate. Purpose unknown. Historians still argue whether rats are capable of symbolic thinking, but you've stopped caring. You've seen too much to dismiss it as coincidence. Midday approaches, and the town begins to stir. The cobbler opens his shutters with a grunt. A dog barks at an invisible threat. A butcher drops a cleaver with a loud metallic thunk. You nod at familiar faces. Some nod back. Some simply smile. A few wave and say, "Morning, Ratman." You respond with a theatrical bow. They chuckle, and you walk on. At the edge of town, the fields stretch outward in sleepy rows. You sit beneath an old elm, where the earth feels solid and safe. The wind rustles through the barley. Your thoughts begin to slow. It's here you pull out your journal and reread the first few pages. Your handwriting was messier then, the words sharper. You were tense, angry, exhausted, determined to win. But somewhere along the way, the war turned into a conversation, and you're grateful. You close the journal and lie back in the grass. The sky above you is a wide bowl of pale blue, speckled with puffy clouds like lamb's wool. A bird circles lazily overhead, perhaps hunting mice. You wish it luck, but also hope it misses. The field smells of warm soil and crushed thyme. A rat's paradise if they venture this far. You half expect to see one peek out from the hedgerow and give you a nod. Instead, you hear the faint scuff of tiny paws in the distance. You smile. Back home, Klaus greets you with disapproval, as always, but this time he follows you into the study. You settle into your wooden chair, open your journal again, and begin a fresh page. Final observations, you write. No signs of aggression. Territory stable. Leadership presumed intact. Mutual peace achieved. May Captain continue his rule in wisdom and in walnut. You draw a crown above his head, a little crooked. Regal, but modest. Klaus sneezes on the page. You consider that a blessing. As the sun begins to set, the town glows gold. Lanterns flicker, windows warm from within. You pour yourself a small cup of beer and sit by the window. Below, the alleyways twist in soft shadow. Somewhere out there, Captain patrols his tunnels. You wonder if he still wears the monocle in your drawings. You raise your glass. To the rats, you say, and drink. The night thickens. Sounds drift through the air. Laughter from a nearby tavern, the clink of pottery, the far-off toll of a church bell. You light a single candle and settle into bed. Klaus climbing beside you with a grunt. One last thought flickers through your mind. That maybe, just maybe, this strange chapter of your life has made you better. Not just a better rat catcher or observer, but a better human. More patient, more thoughtful, less inclined to stomp. You've learned something the rest of the town may never understand. Sometimes the best way to win is to listen, to wait, to leave a walnut at the mouth of a tunnel and see what happens next. And sometimes that's enough. The candle flickers as the shadows settle. Your limbs grow heavier now, drawn gently toward stillness, your breath slowing in time with the hush of night. Klaus, that odd little beast, lets out a purring sigh and nestles closer. Outside, the wind hums through the shutters like a lullaby from an old friend. The fire crackles low. You think of the tunnels beneath the town, how they stretch on quietly, purposefully, like capillaries beneath skin. You wonder where Captain sleeps tonight, in a cedar-scented burrow, curled in a nest of thread and wool. Maybe, like you, he too is tired of battles. Maybe peace suits you both. Your journal rests on the nightstand, ink drying slowly on the final page. You made it. From panic and pestilence to understanding. From scratches on a floorboard to symbols carved in dirt. The past is behind you now. You've earned your rest. So let your thoughts soften. Let them wander like drowsy rats through candle-lit tunnels. Let sleep find you, like Captain did. On his own terms, gently, decisively. Good night, rat catcher. And sweet dreams.